We are infinite,
ineffable, and innately worthy.
Our guest is Kate Northrup Watts, author, entrepreneur, CEO, mother, and nervous system whisperer for ambitious women.
It always starts with safety, because without safety, we can't actually fully experience anything else. We were with our therapist and he said, okay, Kate, so go inside. Imagine now that Mike has walked in the door and he said, babe, I just made $10 million. So for the foreseeable future, you don't need to work, all is well. And David said, how do you feel? And I was shocked because how I felt was completely flatlined and like dead inside. That experiment changed everything for me to be able to realize, oh, Mike coming home with $10 million would have never made me feel safe. It was going to make me feel dead. What I needed was to feel safe, and no amount of money is going to provide that.
And you never have a chance to feel safe. You don't even know what it feels like.
We're also taught that if we're afraid enough, we'll be safe.
Like we could worry ourselves to safety.
Yes.
Doesn't work.
But how many of us are running around thinking, if I think about enough things, if I cover enough worst case scenarios, if I worry about the people I love enough, then I will keep myself and them safe, which is definitely not going to happen.
Creating our own sense of safety, like a profound and enduring sense of safety, is for our own benefit, but it also gets paid forward. We can then be that regulating energy in the world, and you can serve others in that way. Kate Northrup, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
You have done so many things. You're a thought leader, you're an entrepreneur, you're a best-selling author, you're the mother of 2 daughters, you've got a husband, you have led hundreds of thousands of people to a new relationship with time, money, energy. And as we start, I want for the person who's listening to us right now to understand, what are they going to experience differently by listening to us today, listening to you?
Well, my desire is that we would, to any extent, melt the lie of scarcity and melt the lie of separation. And ultimately, the reason I do what I do is to help people connect back up with source with a capital S. And I play in the world of money and time because they're the 2 resources that everyone tends to want more of, but always feels like they're running out of. So it's a potent place to play.
It is potent. And I feel like that node is a place where I work with so many women and men, but especially women who want to shine, they want to share their light with the world, and yet they find themselves time and again in a place of burnout. So I know you see this all day long, every day. So what are some of the steps? Like, can you break that down for me? Where do you start in terms of connecting people to source?
It's a big conversation. And of course, some people use the word God, universe, life force, whatever. And some people don't even believe in that. So sometimes it's fun to just say having more energy because that's, you know what I mean?
It's code. It's code.
That's who doesn't want to have more energy. And most people believe that is at least a little bit possible for them. And I like to work just at the edge between what we think is possible for us, and just like slightly outside that, but not like crazy, let's throw the ball so far out, because what we know is when we so crazy go like, no, you could, be a millionaire, private jet, whatever, people, I don't know, be having 35 orgasms a day, and people are like, no. Right? It bumps up against all of our programming of what even is possible, of what even we would have the capacity for. And then we clamp down when we shut down and we go into constriction and contraction. And that's kind of the opposite desire that we have. And so I like to work with people around softening that edge. And so we can do it a million times a day. Anytime we come up against like, I'm rushing, I feel behind. I feel overwhelmed. I feel angry, sad, and like any opportunity when we're even the slightest bit dysregulated can be that moment to say to our bodies, not in language, but in a physiological signal, you are safe. And the more we habituate our ability to find safety in our bodies, the more I find that we plug back in to source, because the nervous system is our body's electrical. Feel free to explain more on the anatomy of that. That's my more energetic understanding of it. And we are light beings. We are made of light and energy. And to me, source is light. It is the divine. It is the animating mystery. And ultimately, it's just energy, right? And you can talk about the mitochondria and how that all works. But ultimately, like our ability to be lit up requires us to first feel safe. So I always say safety first. And I'm happy to get into, ways and practices and when and all of that stuff. But it always starts with safety, because without safety, we can't actually fully experience anything else in a whole way.
Safety is critical. And I've really seen over the course of my career how many women don't feel safe. We live in a culture that keeps us from feeling safe. We're threatened in a lot of different ways. We have more than our share of emotional labor in relationships and in our families. I'm curious about your own journey, how you came to this understanding about safety, how you came to discover what you've learned about the nervous system, maybe any aha moments along the way. And does that moment of catching yourself and not feeling safe, does it still come up for you?
All the time. So I'll answer that part first and I'll come back. But there were two particular moments for me. One of them was in 2016, after I had given birth to my first daughter. I had a very traumatic birth. She was sick. When she was born, she wasn't breathing. It was like, and that year was just brutal. And my response to it was postpartum anxiety and super hypervigilance. I was controlling beyond any realm of reasonableness. And I made my husband and anyone who came into contact with my baby slightly crazy because of my black and white thinking, which I came to realize was a trauma response. So anyway, my baby's 13 months old. I get my period back. And I, for the first time, was really interested and excited about tracking my period, which was cool. It just happened spontaneously. And I started a little journaling practice where I would write down what day of my period I was on, what phase of my cycle I was on, and what was going on with the moon, and then how I felt. And within a month or two, I was no longer anxious. And later on, I read this interesting study in The Female Brain by Dr. Luann Brizendine in her Mommy Brain chapter, where she talked about they took some mama monkeys, and one group of the monkeys, they gave consistent, abundant food and resources every day. And the second group, they gave not quite enough food and resources, food and water every day, but consistent. And then the third group, it was all over the place. Some days it was a ton, some days it was none. It was totally unpredictable. And what happened was, of course, as one would expect, the mama monkeys who had abundant food and water every single day consistently thrived. But there was not a significant difference between the ones with abundance and the ones with not quite enough, because both of them had consistency. So they knew what to expect. The third group went nuts, stopped being able to care for their young, and showed severe signs of distress from the inconsistency and the lack of predictability. So when I read that study later on, I realized, the reason that my anxiety went away when I started tracking my cycle is because I finally had something predictable that I could depend on in this sea of what I was experiencing as chaos in new motherhood
Yes.
with a sick child.
Yes.
And I was quite under-resourced and really didn't realize it in a lot of different ways. So that happened.
I feel like I should also add a little aside
Great, please
here
do.
that you're the daughter of the OG
Right.
of women's health.
So
And
isn't that wild that
so
you would
I
think like, whoa, she might have. But I think that's such an indication of, I mean, I don't want to be overly negative, but it's such an indication of how much we are paddling upstream as a culture. Because if I, as the woman who was raised by the OG of women's wisdom and power and advocacy for self and cyclical awareness and all of it, if I too was struggling on such a profound way and like being smart, working hard, all that stuff, those strategies didn't work. Oh, it's a really good thing that you do your work that you do. So
well, it's difficult. It's difficult.
difficult.
We're still embedded in this culture where birth is traumatic for a lot of us.
I know. And I thought I could totally orchestrate the perfect birth because I was raised in such a birth positive household. I watched all the documentaries. I read all the books. I even had an ecstatic birthing coach.
Of course. You probably had a playlist.
Oh, I was so ready. And then when it went off the rails, it was a beautifully humbling experience, but in the moment it was brutal. So the second thing that happened was years and years later, which was my husband and I had moved to Miami somewhat under duress and unexpectedly. He was incredibly ill for the second time, had gone fully down with, it's a little hard to say like there's not really a clear diagnosis, but we'll just say it's like red man syndrome, steroid withdrawal, severe toxicity.
Okay.
Showing up as crazy peeling raw skin all over his total body and like dropping 40 pounds in 1 month, like barely able to function.
Okay.
So we moved to Miami as part of his healing protocol. But then he's really sick. We have 2 little kids. You know, our girls were 2.5 and 5 at the time. I've just moved away from family. We're paying for 2 lives all of a sudden because we had our whole life in Maine and now we're paying for life in Miami. Private school unexpectedly. It was just like so much. Partner down. He's also my business partner. So it just felt like so much stress and pressure on me. And it was. And then he started to get better and then he broke his knee. And so now he also couldn't walk. And I remember calling my mom and I was like, Mom, it's too much. She was like, it is too much. I'm so like, she just was like, this is too much. So we had a session with our therapist and my loop had been, if Mike could just go make a bunch of money, I will finally feel safe.
Right.
That was my loop. And it was not great for a number of reasons, but we were with our therapist and he said, okay, Kate, so go inside, close your eyes. Imagine now that Mike has walked in the door and he said, babe, I just made $10 million. So for the foreseeable future, you don't need to work. We don't need to do anything. All is well. And David said, how do you feel? And I was shocked because how I felt was completely flatlined and like dead inside. And what we know about the power of visualization is the body doesn't lie. It has no idea if something's actually happening or if you're just imagining it. And so I knew that response was actually accurate. And what I realized after unpacking that with him was that I was using stress and pressure as my fuel source to feel alive, as a stimulus.
Yes.
And I didn't even know who I would be without it. And I didn't have any evidence that that was not required to hit our financial goals. And so what I did is I did a 90-day experiment, which was recommended by my other therapist.
All the therapists.
And Davin. She was like, okay, let's do 90 days. And what she said, she had me come up with an amount of money that I would be comfortable just going into our savings that I knew I could figure out how to make back, or 90 days. So she was like, either you'll lose a certain amount of money or 90 days will pass. And either way, the experiment's over. I was like, okay, great. And she said, every time you feel that ramp up energy, that like, okay, I gotta go build this campaign. I gotta go do this thing. We done made a money. I'm gonna write the email. And blah, 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 blah. I got this idea. Every time you feel that, you are going to, I just was like supposed to relax. And that looked like a number of different things. I started watching television during the day while my kids were at school, like daytime TV. I started going down to sit by the water in Miami and just ask Biscayne Bay like what message it had for me. I did a lot of crying on my couch and screaming in pillows and like talking to girlfriends on FaceTime. So that was what relax meant, quote unquote.
Okay.
Just so those are the actual practical steps. And what ended up happening is, which was so crazy, I kept running the business like we delivered all the things we had promised, but I didn't do anything new. That was my commitment.
Okay.
What happened was 90 days in, we had hit all of our financial goals. I had not been allowed to run the habitual pattern of ramp up from stress and pressure. And now I had this lived experience that if I could find safety inside myself first, then the whole world would rearrange, not the whole world, but my whole world would rearrange around that. And I actually was able to really shift, not permanently, but that experiment changed everything for me to be able to realize, Mike coming home with $10 million would have never made me feel safe. It was going to make me feel dead. What I needed was to feel safe. And no amount of money is going to provide that.
So profound because you were initially looking for a solution outside of yourself.
Right.
You wanted Mike to solve this.
Totally.
And you also had such a pattern around hustle culture, working harder, pushing, overfunctioning maybe.
Yeah. Well, and it's embarrassing also because this happened 2 years after I published a book called Do Less.
Yeah. Sometimes we have to keep learning the lessons that are in our book.
Well, here I am.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, you serve 98% women.
Mm-hmm.
You have some guys who are in your programs. Are there some differences like sex or biological differences, sociocultural differences that lead to women having a different relationship with money? One that they need to decode, which is really, it seems like that's a big part of what you do in your work.
It absolutely is. And the answer is yes, in a big way. Women for thousands of years have been purposefully kept out of commerce, other than as being valued for their ability to procreate or provide pleasure. And it's really recent history, that we've even been participating the way we are in earning our own money, having our own assets. 1975 was the year that the law changed that women could get a line of credit in their own name without a male cosigner. And so that's really recent.
1975. That's amazing. I mean, that's as bad as the women's health gap.
Yeah.
And the lack of research that's done on women, which has led to this knowledge gap.
Yes.
And so women being left out of commerce.
Or being seen as commercial assets.
Yes.
Right. So we have been objectified and we have been property. And so to now be owning property or stewarding property and not being property is new. And that those patterns, that fear, those histories live in our bodies, and they live in our genetics, epigenetically speaking, and they live in ancestral trauma. And so the work that we do as women around money is so deeply profound because it is the work about our relationship with power, which is something that I learned a lot about from one of my mentors, Barbara Hewson. And she says that our ambivalent relationship with money is because of our ambivalent relationship with our power. And as women, for generations, it has not been safe to be a powerful woman. You know, if we think about the witch trials, if we think about all of the ways that women have been prosecuted for standing out, for speaking out, for standing up, of course it makes sense that, you know, a high-powered lawyer will be like making all this money and then completely disassociating and spending it all and having nothing to show for it. I cannot even tell you the number of my peers who take me aside and say, like, I have a multi-7-figure business and I don't know where it all goes. Like, how is it possible that I have nothing to show for it? And so there's a disassociation that happens, but there's also a hypervigilance. And of course, those are two ends of the very same spectrum, which is fundamentally, I don't feel safe with money because we haven't had models. We haven't been taught. There's all this fear in our bodies. So that's with women. And by the way, you know, neuroplasticity is amazing and a miracle. And so there's so much we can do about that. That is not at all a foregone conclusion.
Yes.
And then with men, I think there's so much pressure in a different way around you must be the provider. Your value is to earn money. And then there's also this like kind of escape hatch of, well, if I provide the money, I don't have to show up in other ways, which isn't as much happening in my generation, but certainly like my dad's generation.
Yes.
And that trickles down. And so I think, you know, I've never met anybody who doesn't have money issues, but the way they show up is really different based on gender identity, based on how you were raised, based on different delineations of privilege. But no amount of money, no amount of net worth, no amount of earning gets us out of dealing with our money issues.
So you just took us on this path of really understanding why as women we feel ambivalence about money. And you come back to this statement of safety. Can you say more about how is it that you create safety yourself? And also, this is something you teach. Like, I did one of your guided meditations. Your podcast is amazing. And I did it in my hot tub that's not far from where we're recording right now. And
that sounds so lovely.
In the sunlight in the morning. And it created this altered state, this state of utter safety, of balance in my nervous system. And I feel like in many ways we're taught as women to run the fear pattern. And you never have a chance to feel safe. You don't even know what it feels like.
We're also taught that if we're afraid enough, we'll be safe, which is complete.
Like we could worry ourselves to safety.
Yes.
Doesn't work.
Fully insane. But how many of us are running around thinking, if I think about enough things, if I cover enough worst case scenarios, if I worry about the people I love enough, then I will keep myself and them safe, which is definitely not going to happen. It's just like not the way. And so the way we create safety in the body is not the same thing as telling ourselves we're safe, right? So for example, I use mothering metaphors a lot because it has profoundly impacted my ability to learn to feel safe enough in my body to communicate to my children's bodies that they are safe. So if my kid is having a insane meltdown where she has left her body, it's like a poltergeist has gotten her, and and she's gone, and she's been like screaming the same word over and over again for over an hour. This used to happen 5 nights a week in my house. There is no amount of me saying to her, "You're safe."
Right.
She's not in her cognitive ability to metabolize that information. But if I can become the thermostat, if my nervous system energetically can feel safe enough to then be next to her body, hold her, like rock her and communicate like, you're safe. She feels that and she could come back, And that is such a missed opportunity in our culture. We think that connection is through the mind and words, but what we know is 90% of communication is nonverbal.
That's right.
But we're not talking about our bodies. They're just an afterthought.
Right.
And so really, my mission is I speak on behalf of the body, because the body can't use words. And if we can each learn to speak that language, it's physiological cues that, sympathetic versus parasympathetic dominance, right? And we can feel our way into safety, but we can't think our way into safety.
It's such a critical point. And I appreciate you getting misty as you talk about your daughters and creating safety for them. And in some ways, as I learned to create safety in my body, bottom up, really with, I'm someone who's got an adverse childhood experience score of 6. And so I really had to learn how to calm my system down and create safety. And what is so empowering, I believe, is the way that, yes, you need to create safety for yourself and learn how to do that. But the way that you can pay it forward, the way that you can offer your nervous system to co-regulate your daughters, your followers, the people that sign up for your programs, the readers of your books, the friends and family that you surround yourself with, that's really deep service.
Yeah. I had to with my first baby. Like that, her being here forcefully invited me into a different way of being with myself so that I could be with her. And it's been really hard, but like really beautiful. And I think about that, the people that we're around, that we're drawn to. Now, sometimes when we're in our unconscious patterning, our not so safe patterning, right? I know that you've heard that the quote, "Our nervous system will choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven," and so that we will be magnetized to those that match our wounds. However, over time, as we begin to do the repatterning, we begin to be magnetized towards those who are more of a match for the healing. And then as we work on those things in ourselves, I think we can help others accelerate the process as well. And so I think it is such a service, right? Because we know, from the Institute of Heart Math that the electromagnetic field of the heart is 60 times higher than that of the brain. Our energy is just talking out loud all the time, everywhere we go. And what a beautiful service to kind of clean it up for the people who come into your sphere. And it does feel better to ourselves. So we don't have to do it for other people, but they do benefit.
Kate, you got misty as you were talking about your daughter. And there's a way that she was asking you to evolve. And you learned so much about regulation in your own system and then also how to co-regulate her, which is really our first job as mothers. And what I think is so beautiful is that creating our own sense of safety, like a profound and enduring sense of safety, is for our own benefit, but it also gets paid forward because we can then be that regulating energy in the world, and you can serve others in that way. And I imagine that this is a big part of the service that you offer in your books, in your podcast. I know it's in your podcast, and everything that you do with your community. So what have you learned in that process?
One thing that being Penelope's mother has required of me was something that I really needed to learn, and it just took her birth and and being her mom to do it, was increasing my capacity to stay when things are uncomfortable. So I'm a 7 Enneagram, and our unconscious way is to pop out when things get uncomfortable. And when you have a child who is severely dysregulated and needs care, popping out is not an option, or at least not for the kind of mother I am. And so those moments of staying when she was screaming or anything going on required so much fortitude and deepening. And what it really required was me staying not only with her, but then simultaneously staying with my own child parts that also wanted to run, that also felt unsafe. So there was, it feels like a continuing deepening of also past ancestral healing and parts of my previous self. It would be like, I'm rocking her, but I'm also rocking me.
Yes.
And so that was a gift. And in spaces, whether it's in programs or, more energetically with a podcast or writing a book or whatever, there's also, I'm super aware that many, many people have not had a consistent presence in their life that holds the thermostat of unequivocal belief and absolute possibility. And like, you cannot convince me any reason why you are the exception, that you don't get to thrive, that you don't get to be joyful, that you don't get to be whole. And so my job in my programs is to show up as that, because no one could convince me that they're the one person who, for some reason, all this stuff doesn't apply to them. It's not possible. And I know that not everyone has that. So I am that person to consistently bring them back to that frequency. And when I say that frequency, it is a feeling in my body. It is a feeling of grounded, expansive emanation of an energy that I know can go across the planet, that I know can touch someone anywhere. And so that's my job, to keep tending to that fire, to hold for folks. Not for folks, but like with them.
I feel that. It's a touchstone that you maybe create a larger mirror for others to really see safety is possible. And that feeling of lack that tends to drive us to fear-based decisions, to overwork and overfunctioning, you're offering an alternative. That's very profound. And so I want to take someone who's listening, who's maybe a nurse or a public school teacher, air traffic controller, someone who has a really high risk of burnout. And maybe that resonates with some of the patterning of childhood and connects with some of that trauma that, they get that adrenaline rush.
Yes.
But it also has a cost, physically, mentally, emotionally. Walk us through a process of how to create that sense of safety and maybe have that sense, as you were describing, of we can be connected to source.
Yeah, we can be connected to source at all times. Now, I think we need to plug back in multiple times a day. I think we get disconnected many times. But the cool thing about nervous system healing is it is compounding. So it's not like brushing your teeth, where you just have to brush your teeth twice a day, every day, the same amount for the rest of your life. Your teeth are going to be the same amount of dirty tomorrow. With the nervous system, though, it compounds. So when we make those investments of daily practice to signal safety, we're not starting at the same floor. It becomes the ceiling from yesterday becomes the floor for tomorrow. And I love that, because I love progress.
It's efficient.
It's efficient. And so that also helps me when I'm like, I don't want to do a practice. I mean, I just want to sit here and like loaf around or like think about it or bitch about it or whatever. That also helps me because I know it's like a compounding investment, very similar to when you put your money in an asset that will compound over time. Okay. So let's say you're in a high stress job. I remember my mom, who was an OBGYN. When I was born, she was delivering babies. It was like very chaotic. My dad was also in medicine, so they were always on call, and who even knew what was going on. And I remember her talking about that she would track her cycle and know where she was in her cycle. And she had really no capacity to change anything about her day based on where she was in her cycle. But like if she was having her period, she would just see if she could like walk slower from her car to the door of the hospital. Like that was the practice. And I found that really powerful and inspiring because I think we can throw those things out as like, oh, it doesn't matter. But it's not so much about what we do, it's about how we do it. And my mom's dad, Wilbur, who I never got to meet, is famous for his line, which was, how you do it is what you get. So, under high stress situations, whether you're caring for a loved one, you've just had a baby, you're an air traffic controller, you're an emergency room nurse, whatever the scenario, you're always going to be doing those things while living in a body. That's 100% true, 100% of the time. And as long as you're alive in your body, you can be signaling safety while doing literally anything. And so our body is the 24/7 portal that is available. And I think that's so cool because it's the one thing that we all have in common. And it's for sure going to be there your entire lifespan. So what are some examples? Well, my mom walking slower to the hospital. That's a good one. Another great one, easy to do, easy not to do, is to become aware of gravity. So we can do it right now,
Great.
Just feel gravity. And it can be helpful, of course, to do it with your eyes closed. But if you're with a patient or you're in triage, you're not going to close your eyes. You're just going to feel gravity. And right now, as I'm doing it, I'm aware subtly that the tone of my voice changed. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
There are physiological responses that let us know our body feels even incrementally safer, and we don't have to change what we're doing. And I like to make anything I'm doing a living prayer for more safety, more abundance, whatever it is. So like stirring soup can become a ritual of calling in more abundance or of feeling safer. You can just become more aware. What does it feel like for my hand to be touching this wooden spoon? What do the beans look like floating around in there? What's the color? So when we can literally come to our senses, that sensational information, that sensational stimulus actually begins to metabolize stress because our survival brain does not have if our survival brain is going off into fight, flight, freeze, all of those things, and you are providing an opportunity to then become aware of your sensory experience, feel gravity, breathe into your lower back ribs, that is letting the body know, oh, I'm actually not getting chased by a tiger, because if you were being chased by a tiger, you would not have the capacity to feel gravity, right? You would not have the capacity to look at the color of the green beans in your soup. You just wouldn't. And so it's a very cool way to let your body know, like, hey, baby, we're safe, but you do it through your senses.
It's subtle.
It's subtle.
And it's, as I reflect on some of these examples you're giving, first with your mother, walking more slowly when she's menstruating from her car to the hospital. I have never done that in my life. I walk so fast.
Right?
Especially from the car to the hospital. Yeah. And that is signaling fight, flight, freeze.
Yes.
It's sympathetic dominance. It's that survival pathway that I'm so familiar with. And I imagine many of our listeners are also so familiar with. And I was joking with you before we hit the record button about Costa Rica, how Costa Rica is a place where I get out of survival mode. But it's not that convenient for me to go to Costa Rica. And so finding these solutions, like stirring the soup with the wooden spoon or feeling gravity, these are really simple solutions that help you develop interoception, that feeling of being inside this body and not just, the brain that's walking around on the top of it, but, feeling with your entire body. So I appreciate that.
And what's so cool about when we come into our body, when we come to our senses, is it does increase our ability to, of course, co-regulate with other humans. So if you are in a caring profession, it's actually going to make you better at your job. It also, I don't have the data on this, but I know for myself, it helps me open up to my intuition and to my capacity to feel something that might need to be said that's not imminently obvious, but I'll just be able to pull it out. It'll just drop in a coaching session, or I'll just say, like, I don't know why I'm saying this, but here it is. And then it turns out to be exactly what needed to be said. So there's actually a beautiful efficiency and deepening that can happen in our work lives when we do this. Because I think there can be this idea, oh, if I slow down in any way, that's going to be weakness. That's going to make me not as good at what I do. That's going to take me out of the game. That's going to make me irrelevant in some way. And what I've found is that it's the opposite. And it also makes us really magnetic. Because think about, right? So, if you're listening to that meditation and you're in the hot tub, which is obviously like a deeply regulating thing, regardless of the meditation, and you're in the sunshine, right? Like all of those things are signaling to your body that there's safety. And then you go and you're on a Zoom call and it's some sort of business scenario and whatever, and maybe there's a deal to be done or a contract to be signed or whatever. You are then showing up in your luminosity in a very different way than if you're showing up ragged, rushing, in lack of time, in lack of whatever. That's actually kind of repulsive to resources and big opportunities versus you show up as the goddess that you are, resourced, whole, magnetic. Folks are like, I don't know what she's got going on, but like sign me up, right? I'm going to pay her money, going to get her on my thing, whatever it is. So it really is actually an important business strategy as well, even though that's not why we do it.
So you're connecting the dots between safety, getting out of survival mode, creating the type of relationship with energy source, money, power, time. Could you maybe make it a little more specific? Like, what have you noticed in your own life as you've created this safety? What's different with your relationship to power and time?
So, practical example, the other day, I was on a call with some mucky muck business people from New York. And previously to this year, I would have gotten on that call and felt like my little girl self. I really would have shown up on that call as a 14-year-old girl, like, oh, like me. I hope you think I'm smart enough. Scared. And because of little things every day. And like just yesterday, I was in the airport, come in here, there's a lot going on, blah, 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 blah. Airports, right? The general vibe is not always the best, but I just made a conscientious effort to put my phone in my purse, make eye contact with other humans, and I put my bag down and I did one of my nervous system practices, which is I call the washing machine. And you just stand with your feet about hip width apart and you just twist your upper torso and let your arms just flop back and forth like a washing machine. So like left arm front, right arm back, right arm front, left arm back, and just like doing that back and forth for a few cycles. Did I look weird? Yes, I don't care. So that part, that part requires some capacity. So that took me a few years to even just be willing to look weird in the airport. But those small things, right, over time build up so that I then find myself in the meeting with the people, and the guy, who's owned this company for over 20 years, very successful, looks at me and says, "So what gets you out of bed in the morning? Why do you do this?" And without skipping a beat, I just told him the truth, which is what I told you. I am here to reconnect people back to source, to the divine spark through their bodies. And I happen to do that through the playground of money because it's something everybody wants more of. And I wouldn't have been able to do that years ago because I didn't feel safe enough to be all of me, to be a little weird, to be kind of fringy in a more traditional environment. And he loved it, and we signed a deal and it was great. And that's a practical example of how this can show up. It shows up as being more present, which impacts the world as being more powerful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Regulated.
Yeah.
Deeply present. And in your power.
Yeah. And lovely to be around. Not that you have to be lovely to be around, because it's okay to also, not be people pleasing, but in business and in work, it's relational.
Yes.
And money is relational. Anytime you receive money, it has come through the hands of another human being. And so it's always about humans.
Beautiful. So as we start to wrap up, Kate, can you share with us what's on the horizon for you? Like what are you really excited about? I'm hearing about this deal and I'm curious about it. Doesn't have to be that, but tell us.
I am working on a new book, which I'm
Okay.
excited about. It's about women and money and the nervous system. And, that's in the works. I'm really excited about that, so that these concepts can reach the world in a bigger way, and really that intersection of what the world would call mental health, although I don't really love that phrase for what I do, even though it's the category folks want to put me in. And I'm like, it's not mental health. It's not just the mind. But anyway, regardless, but that intersection between mental health, financial health, and really spiritual well-being. So I'm excited about that. I'm also just personally super excited to learn more about mitochondria and their connection to the nervous system, and what we were talking about on my podcast around ovulation and eggs being, powered by the mitochondria, and how that comes from the maternal line, and what it has to do with being light beings. And I'm just excited about that from a personal level, because I have independently become very fascinated by using light and quantum, quantum biology to revive my own metabolism and mitochondria. And I think it has a lot to do with connection to source.
Yes.
And using alternative energy forms beyond just the food we eat to power ourselves up. So I don't have all the things on that, but that's what I'm chewing on these days.
It's super interesting. So give us just a little taste. How do you revive yourself?
Well, I was really struggling with my health over, a while ago, let's say 7 months ago. And so I started listening to all these things and checking out all these things, just more fringy stuff. Because I was like, I'm doing all the stuff that everyone says to do, so it can't be that, right? And I started learning more about circadian rhythms, more about blue light, more about that. And I was listening to a woman named Sarah Kleiner, and I just started listening to her stuff. And I realized that there was a lot more toxic light in my life than I was aware of. I mean, I knew don't be on your phone past dark, all that stuff. I knew the basics, but I just realized, she was talking a lot about how metabolically active our bellies are. And so I started going out in a string bikini, to get actual light on my belly, because I knew that that was going to help absorb even more light. And I started being less afraid of the sun in certain ways. And it just really felt like I was just going out there and charging my batteries.
So good.
And very regulating also.
Yeah. It's so funny because I just wrote a chapter in my new book about what mitochondria need.
Yeah.
And how women and our mitochondria are different than men and their mitochondria. And there are ways that women often have more mitochondrial impairment related to estrogen, which regulates the mitochondria. And so that's, in some ways that can be a curse, but it can also be a blessing because you can modulate these things. So the way that mitochondria responds to daylight, the way that mitochondria responds to being fed the right fuel, the right nutrients, that task of getting out of survival mode and how much that can support the mitochondria, and sort of the way that we are marvels of adaptation. And so even if you are feeling like your energy is low, maybe your mitochondria are impaired, there's so many different ways that we can address that.
Yeah.
So I really like the string bikini and the abdominal exposure to sun.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a look at that.
Yeah.
Kate.
And I'm sure there's some benefit to exposing more of you. I just don't have a setup for that in my life, but I look forward to when I do.
I love it. So Kate, any last words before we wrap up?
Yeah. So many people say your net worth is equivalent to your self-worth. That really drives me crazy, because what I want folks to not only know, but feel, and when you feel safe, you can actually feel the truth of this, and that is this. Our worth is infinite, ineffable, and innate. There is nothing any of us could ever do or not do to make us any more or less worthy. More or less doesn't even make sense to be talking about when it comes to our inherent worth. And when we can tap into that place through signaling safety to our body and then expanding our capacity to let life flow through us while still staying present, whole, and actually learning to enjoy the ride, that is really the unlock to be in deep divine connection with source. And it also happens to make your money life a lot more vibrant and easier to manage.
It's beautiful. Beautiful. We are infinite,
ineffable, and innately worthy.
Innately worthy. That's a beautiful point on which to end. Thank you, Kate Northrup.
Thank you.